Hi everybody, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. It's time for our Bible story tonight. And I read it out of this book usually, but there's a couple stories that went together, and I'm going to just tell you these stories. And one of them is Love's Greatest Test. Now, Abraham was 100 years old when he had the promised baby, him and Sarah. And I can imagine they must have been so excited. And everybody in camp, all the servants, and were very excited too. Everybody except one person. And that person was Hagar. That's the handmaid that Sarah gave to Abraham so that they could have a baby, because they thought maybe that's how they were going to get the baby that God promised. But that's not what God had planned. And Hagar was really upset because everyone was making such a big deal about little baby Isaac. Well, and her son, Ishmael, he wasn't very happy either. And so they began to tease, say things about the little baby. And they weren't very nice things. And Sarah began to get very upset, and they began arguing, Sarah and Hagar, until Sarah just couldn't take it anymore, and she talked to Abraham, and she said, I can't stand this. The jealousy and the fighting, it's awful. I just won't put up with it. Well, Abraham, he loved Ishmael too. That was his son. It wasn't the promised son that came from Sarah, but of course he loved him. That was his son, 14 years old. He didn't know what to do. So he went and prayed to God. And God said to him, when he answered, you know, it is better that Hagar and Ishmael leave and aren't in your camp anymore. But you don't have to worry about Ishmael. I promise I will make a great nation of him. A lot of people will be born from him, and I will take care of him. Well, the day came when Abraham had to tell Hagar and Ishmael that they would be leaving. They couldn't stay there anymore. And that must have been a terrible day for him. I can just see the old man with tears in his eyes. And he sent them off with food and water. But after a while, the water ran out. And Hagar and Ishmael, they were out in the desert. And they were almost dead. Back in camp, everybody was super happy about little baby Isaac. But they didn't know what was going on with Hagar. Well, Ishmael was almost dead. And Hagar called out to God. And God answered her. And he said not to worry. He was going to take care of Ishmael. Well, she'd been so weak that her eyes were closed. Then she opened her eyes, and you know what she saw? A well. So she got up, and she took that jar, and she lowered it into the well, and she filled it up with water. Good, fresh well water. And she took it to her son, Ishmael, and she gave him some. And as he drank that, he began to feel better. And after a while, he was so good, they could continue to travel. And God had kept his promise. The next part of this story is kind of hard to understand. Now, do you remember I told you that back in those days, so long ago, people would offer a sacrifice to God. It was usually a lamb, could be a pigeon or something like that, and they killed it. And then they would build up an altar, usually out of rocks, I'm sure, maybe always out of rocks, and they would build a fire on that, and they would put that offering, whether it was a lamb or even a cow, and they would burn it up. And God was about to test whether Abraham loved him more or whether he loved his son Isaac more. So this was the test. He told Abraham that he was to take his son Isaac up to a certain hill, and he was to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. They never did that type of thing, and Abraham just couldn't understand it. Offer his only son? I thought he was supposed to be the first of so many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that was like the dust of the earth or the stars of the sky. But Abraham knew that he had heard from God, and with a broken heart, but trusted God at the same time, he gathered up a donkey and a bundle of wood and a knife and his son Isaac, who was now much bigger. And they began to go. He says, we're going on a journey. And they left camp. Well, Isaac didn't know what was going to happen. And so here they were traveling. And Abraham was this whole time praying to God, trying to understand it. And he thought, I know I can trust God. I've trusted him in everything else. And I believe God will find a way to save Isaac. I just believe it. Well, it wasn't looking like it, and that's what a test is like. It kind of pushes you clear to the edge, and you don't know what's going to happen. Well, they got to the mountain, and Abraham built the altar. And on the altar he put the wood. And then as Isaac was there, he told Isaac what was going to happen. That God had told him to sacrifice his son, Isaac. Well, I'm sure Isaac must have been really upset about that. But he had always been taught to believe in God and that God would take care of him. So he let his father tie him and lay him on the altar. And here's what it looked like. And Abraham was praying to God, and he raised up his knife. And when his knife got up, God said, no, stop. Don't hurt your son. I just wanted to know if you loved me more than you loved your son. I've provided a sacrifice. Take Isaac off that altar. And when Abraham turned around, there was a ram, a male sheep, and he was stuck in some stickers. And Abraham went and got that male sheep, and he put him on the altar, and he offered him because God had provided the sacrifice. Well, after that, Abraham and his son grew even closer together. They knew they could trust God too. And we can trust God. And so they headed back home to their camp. And Abraham was so happy. And his son was so happy. Well, I knew that God would never ask us to kill anybody as a sacrifice that way. That would be awful. But he provided a way. And when you have something that goes kind of hard for you, he will provide a way for you too. He has for me. Well, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I love you, I really do. And I want to pray blessings on you and everyone in your house when it's daytime and when it's nighttime, when you're inside and out. And I'll have another Bible story in a couple days. All right, good night. God bless.